While skill-biased technical change is now thought by most economists to play some role in driving increased inequality, it's not the end of the story. Most importantly, globalization and trade may also play important roles. As many countries with large numbers of less skilled workers have developed their economies and become frequent trading partners with the United States, the effective supply of low-skilled labor, including those workers manufacturing goods abroad, that is available to U.S. firms has expanded dramatically. This, again using simple economic supply and demand models, would predict downward pressure on the wages of low-skilled workers. Standard economic models of trade suggest that major increases in trade with developing countries, such as occurred in the U.S. during the 1980s and 1990s, could be expected to increase inequality. Specifically, such theories predict that an increase in trade with countries that have large numbers of relatively low-skilled workers should mean that the U.S. would increasingly specialize in producing goods that intensively use more highly skilled workers, and trade partners will specialize in goods that intensively use less skilled workers. This would imply an increase in demand for more skilled workers in the U.S., and so drive up the wages of more highly educated workers. This theory made a great deal of sense to explain what was happening to U.S. wages during the 1980s and 1990s, but there are also reasons to go beyond this simple story. Economic theory also predicts that, as a result of increased trade, U.S. industries that intensively use skilled labor should expand, and the fraction of less skilled workers in these industries should rise. Empirical studies of the industry structure of the U.S., however, have not shown dramatic enough shifts into these high-skilled industries. In fact, the increase in demand for more skilled workers has occurred fairly evenly across many industries. This suggests that a conventional trade-based explanation for rising inequality, which has the prediction that highly skilled worker-intensive industries would grow more dramatically, does not have complete empirical support. Economists have sought to rationalize this lack of empirical support for simple predictions of standard economic models. Conventional economic models of the effects of trade make many assumptions and often work from a simplified two-country example. Another key assumption of these models is that workers can move easily between different industries and geographic areas, facilitating the type of wage and employment adjustments that drive the model results. Recent work by economists has taken a different approach, one that recognizes that there may be frictions in the economy that make workers fairly immobile between different industries or across geographic locations. For example, different industries may require specialized skills so that changing industries in response to trade-induced shocks may be difficult and time or resource intensive. Economists David Otter and Gordon Hanson look at this issue using local areas and local industries to see which have been most directly affected by trade or by imported goods more specifically. In particular, their studies focus on effects of trade between the U.S. and China. China's economy is growing very rapidly with extremely low wages and a large and young labor force. On top of this, changes during this period resulted in reductions in shipping costs, making it more profitable to manufacture goods in one part of the world, but sell them in other parts through exports. This figure shows the rapid increase in Chinese imports by the U.S. It shows the import penetration ratio, defined as U.S. imports from China divided by total U.S. expenditures on goods. As you can see, from 2001 through 2005, Chinese imports by the U.S. as a fraction of our expenditures nearly doubled. For cities and states in the U.S. that specialize in making manufactured goods that are also produced and sold in China, this increase in trade sometimes had dramatic consequences. For example, the furniture manufacturing industry in North Carolina was dramatically impacted by competition from Chinese imports. Manufacturing employment in some areas of North Carolina fell by as much as 50%, and furniture imports from China went from $4 billion to more than $20 billion in less than 2 decades. Workers who are pushed out of these U.S. manufacturing jobs often face dramatic earnings reductions or long-term unemployment. While economic models predicted that such workers might move on to different industries, The history of the furniture industry shows that the lack of current skills for new service-based or technology-based jobs and the concentration of these shocks in particular areas made this adjustment very difficult. This next figure illustrates one of Otter and Hansen's main findings. As a local area's import penetration measure increases, moving to the right along the horizontal scale, its change in manufacturing employment declines, moving down the vertical scale. Overall, Otter and Hansen estimated that increased trade with China from 1999 to 2011 resulted in a reduction in employment of approximately 2.4 million jobs. This does not speak directly to questions of the wage distribution, but if workers remain in local areas without jobs, or if demand falls for these types of workers as the result of trade, this will certainly contribute to depressed earnings for less skilled workers, and so may play a role in rising inequality. Summing up what we've learned so far about causes and rising of U.S. wage inequality, we've seen that substantial evidence suggests that rising globalization and technical change have played an important role in increased earnings inequality, with perhaps some additional contributions from low-skilled immigration, declining minimum wages, and declining unionization. At the same time, none of these factors alone can explain the entire phenomenon, because none does a very good job of explaining rising inequality throughout the time period or at the top of the distribution. It's also important to recognize that these potential factors may themselves all be interrelated. For example, it could well be that unionization would not have declined so rapidly if demand for less skilled workers had remained robust, either due to less globalization or less skill-biased technical change. In the same way, technical change may have been spread around the world and through the economy more quickly as a result of growing globalization. Such interactions may be important to understand as one aspect of inequality. These interactions may be important to help understand one final aspect of inequality that is especially difficult to explain. Inequality driven by very large increases in earnings and wealth at the very top of the income distribution is an aspect of rising inequality not very well explained by the factors we've considered so far. This figure shows that the fraction of national income going to the top 1/10 of 1% has risen from under 3% in 1979 to more than 7% by 2005. One final theory puts these different potential causes together in a new way as a potential explanation, especially for the rapid rise in earnings at the top of the income distribution. The theory is known as superstar theory. The theory notes that, in some areas, the output or product of very top producers may be preferred by consumers. For example, people may prefer to listen to the very best opera singer or pop star or watch the very top athletes rather than those in the next tier. If it becomes possible for such a good or service to be made available to many consumers, instead of relying on substitutes that may be just slightly less preferred, that producer can demand a very high price from a broad group of consumers. Thus, having access to a large market may lead to the concentration of economic returns to the very top performers in any given industry. Globalization is one way in which certain markets for goods have increased in size dramatically. Next, consider the role of technological advances, including many of the type that have occurred in recent decades. These may make it easier also to reach broad audiences or market to and sell to very broad consumer groups. All of this can add up to an explanation for how the very top earners in finance, entertainment, high-tech, among other industries, in the U.S. have come to accrue more and more of the earnings gains over the past decade. This combination of technology and globalization may have made this superstar theory especially applicable in recent times. While this theory has less direct proof or directly supporting evidence, it is broadly consistent with many of the facts relating to the evolution of inequality in the U.S. Together, many of the factors we have considered, with a particular role for technology, globalization, and the possibility of interesting interactions between these factors, can begin to explain the dramatic rise in U.S. earnings inequality.